Hello, my name is Alexander Solozhin. I am an RA here at the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. For our War Observatory project, we are conducting a series of interviews with experts in various academic fields relevant to the war in Ukraine. In this series, we cover basic and advanced subject matters relevant to the war. We intend for these videos to be used as teaching materials for faculty and students in Canada and around the world. Joining me here today to answer a few questions regarding the history of Ukraine is Dr. Milana Nikolko. Dr. Milana Nikolko is adjunct research professor at the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. Her research interests cover trauma and collective memories in ethnic groups, victimization narratives of diasporas, the Ukrainian diaspora in remittances, social capital and diaspora networks in comparative perspective, and post-Soviet diasporas. So for the first question, could you please tell me a little bit about the history of Crimea, especially as this concerns the question of who Crimea belongs to and the Crimean Tatars who are indigenous to Crimea?
Thank you, Alexander, for a great introduction. I just want to mention to our listeners that I'm actually native of Crimea. I was born in Crimea and I lived all my life up till 2009 until I immigrated to Canada in Crimea. I was working there in Tavrida National University and still maintain a lot of connection with people living in there. So it's a very personal and at the same time academic question to me, because I'm continuing research on Crimea's situation, particularly in terms of social capital development and ethnic connection in Crimea Peninsula right now. The history of Crimea is very rich and long. The settlements in territory of Crimea appeared 40,000 years ago. We can see the first kind of archaeological discoveries in Crimea show us the significant development of early settlements in Crimea a long time ago, but Crimea became part of the ancient world, I would say about 400 BC, when the first settlers from Greek discovered this beautiful peninsula situated on Black Sea. So Crimea was part of colonization process started in Greek and continue with Roman civilization. Then we saw that medieval history also touched Crimea, and we saw General Republic send them ambassadors and maintain some trade relations with settlers in Crimea. And of course, Byzantium have a very strong influence on Crimea Peninsula. With collapse of Byzantine Empire in 13th century and spread of Mongolian horde over the territory of modern Ukraine and partially Russia, Crimea's demographic mosaic has changed significantly. So from 14th century, we saw that Crimea was under influence of different political entities, and in the end of 14th century developed its own Crimean Khaganate, which was very close to Ottoman Empire. In fact, it was a satellite state of Ottoman Empire, maintained very strong diplomatic, political, economic, and financial relation with Ottoman Empire up till the end of its existence. And the existence of the Crimean Khaganate ended in the end of 18th century with a Russian conquest of southern part of modern Ukrainian Russia and conquest of Crimea. So from end of 18th century till the 1918, Russia was Crimea was part of Russian Empire. During that first period, and let's say first annexation of Crimea, we saw significant migration outflow of Crimean Tatars from the territory of Crimea. Approximately 300,000 people of Crimean Tatar descent left Crimea and migrated to Ottoman Empire in that period of time. And again, it's shifted significantly demographic representation in Crimea. So from 19th century till, I would say, recent times, we saw decline of Crimean Tatars Crimean Tatar population in Crimea, and significant growth of Slavic population, dominated mostly by Russian ethnic group. It's modern history of Crimea. So we probably know about the specifics of the modern Crimean history. And it's interesting how you find the different narratives in Ukrainian historical textbooks or Russian historical textbooks. They have absolutely different model of interpretation. So what actually happened after World War II ended, and let's say internal rebuilding of Soviet structure continue. With the end of Stalinism, with the death of Stalin, we see a new leader appeared in the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, whose ethnic roots were Ukrainian. To change the belonging of Crimea, because from the 1932, the creation of Soviet Union, till 1954, Crimea was autonomic republic. And it's a specified budget, and actually was engaged in the model of inter-ethnic relations between different entities in Soviet Union. In 1954, discussion in Politburo, and of course with the leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, considered the economic perspectives of Crimea. Crimea, located in Black Sea, but connected to mainland to Ukrainian lands. So the economic reason, infrastructural perspective for Crimea were lying in closer relations to Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. So the idea to change belonging of Crimean Peninsula, specifically status of autonomic Republic of Crimea, was actually a collective decision. It was not just dictated by Khrushchev. It was approved, and again, it have a strong economic and infrastructural reasons. So from 1954 till collapse of Soviet Union in 1991, Crimea was part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. In the very end of existence of Soviet Union, right before the collapse of Soviet Union, Crimea was granted status of autonomic socialist republic of the old Soviet level. So the kind of local political elites get back that they were considered to be as some level of administrative freedom, administrative liberties for the local political elites. Were there also strong pro-Russian ethnic sentiments in that period of time? I would say yes. For a long period of time, from the end of World War II, in particular after deportation of Crimean Tatars population, it's a specific tragic event which happened in the end of World War II in 1944 in Crimea, when the entire population of Crimean Tatars were deported to the Central Asia and other part of Soviet Union, and they were prohibited for a long period of time to return back home. So from 1944, we saw again the significant shift in demographic representation of Crimean population. More and more people of Russian descent were moving to Crimea because of the work purpose, but also very interesting strategy was resettled military pensioners to Crimea. So we saw the growth of Russian population decline or literally complete withdrawal of Crimean Tatars population from Crimea for that period of time, and some, I would say, influence growth of Ukrainian population in Crimea. So in 1991, the moment of Soviet Union collapse, we have predominantly Russian population living in Crimea, about 60-65%. We have literally about few thousand of Crimean Tatars, which overcome many barriers to return back to Crimea, some of them successfully, but most of them were stopped on the territorial border between Kherson and Crimea, and about 25% of Russian population. There were also some ethnic groups which considered to be an aboriginal groups in Crimea, like Karayims, Krimchaks. They have a very interesting history, and they've been present in the territory of Crimea for hundreds, in some cases, thousands of years. So it's a mixed population, but in 1991, it was definitely predominant by Russian population in Crimea. So the first attempt to regain kind of autonomous status of all Soviet Republic for Crimea, it was a bit too little too late. With collapse of Soviet Union, Crimea maintained the territorial borders of Ukraine. From 1999 to 1994, we saw some waves of the separatist movements, with support from Russian Federation. That period of time, we saw some regional cooperation between Crimean authorities and authorities in Russia, particularly in Moscow. We saw some soft model of diplomatic relations. We also saw quite aggressive engagement of Russian diplomatic corps in Crimea to maintain strong Russian presence. I just have to mention that it was the period of time when Russia was giving away Russian passports in Crimea. In 1998, the consulate was shut down, but this turbulent time never actually ended up with any significant political demonstrations, riots on territory of Crimea. Why it didn't appear in the 90s? My guess, because Russia was weak in this period of time and very much focused on internal domestic problem. In 1994, it's the Chechen War. We know about separatist movements on the outskirts of Russia. And in that period of time, Ukraine, central power in Kiev, were re-establishing, re-engaging local regional elites. So I would say from 1991 till 2014, relations between regional and central political elites in Ukraine have their unbalanced moment, but I would say nothing was outrageously pointing to the perspective of the strong separatist movement in Crimea. If you look at the spectrum of Russian parties existing in 2010, 2012 in Crimea, just about 3% of the population of Crimea was in support of radical decision in terms of changing belonging of Crimea. So some pro-Russian sentiments were always in the air in Crimea. And again, we're talking about pro-Russian population, Russian-speaking population, and Russian ethnic population in Crimea. But at the same time, Crimea maintained its specific status, autonomous status of Republic of Crimea, as a part of the unitarian state of Ukraine. So at some point, Crimean budget was directly connected to the central power in Ukraine, approved by Ukrainian president. They have a special representative of Crimea for the president of Ukraine. So I would not say the tensions were ever pointed to the position of separatist movement. So when we're talking about situation 2014, although the entire turbulent situation in Ukraine affected Crimea, there was not much of existing problem, or let's say developed Russian narratives which were pointed to the position of separatism. When we consider this annexation of Crimea of 2014, we have to apply idea of irredenta, when a strong ethnic community which exists and dominated in the neighboring country apply the different resources, including propaganda, including financial military support, including diplomatic pressure, and of course using the situation on the ground in the favor of the local population, pursue this unsettled and I would say unjustified territorial claim for, in the case of referendum of 2014, of changing belonging, territorial belonging of Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine to Russia. How legitimate was referendum March 16, 2014? From the Ukrainian constitution perspective, there is no legitimate way for Crimean regional referendum which will reconsider the territorial unity of the country. So it was absolutely illegitimate. How it was maintained, directed by Russian representatives on the peninsula of Crimea in that period of time, it's specific and long conversation. We have this essential knowledge of a different model, how Russia developed these new political narratives in the end of February 2014 through the March of 2014, and later on reconsider the belonging of other territories of Ukraine.